The message came through the deep space radio at 3 in the morning, ship time. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his 4th cup of coffee when the speakers crackled to life with sounds he had never heard before. The voice was like wind chimes, mixed with breaking glass, desperate and afraid. Please, anyone who can hear this transmission. We are the Zenthari Collective. Our worlds are dying. The Void Swarm has taken 12 of our colonies in 3 months. We need help. Please. Jake set down his coffee cup and stared at the radio. In 20 years of space travel, he had never heard of the Zenthari. The outer rim was full of strange signals and lost ships, but this was different. This was real fear. Captain Morrison here. I'm receiving your transmission. What kind of help do you need? The relief in the alien voice was clear. You are human, yes? We have heard stories. Your people solve problems that others cannot. The Void Swarm eats light itself. It turns our beautiful worlds into empty darkness. Our weapons do nothing. Our shields fail. We are running out of time. Jake called his crew to the bridge. His ship, the UES Defiant, was a patrol vessel assigned to the edge of human space. They were supposed to watch for pirates and smugglers, not answer alien distress calls. But the desperation in that voice made him want to help. Commander Lisa Rodriguez was the first to arrive. She was Earth's top expert on alien life forms. Assigned to Jake's ship because strange things happened on the outer rim. She listened to the recorded message 3 times before speaking. Captain, I've never heard of these Zenthari, but the description of the Void Swarm sounds like some kind of energy parasite. If they're telling the truth, we're dealing with creatures that feed on power sources directly. What does that mean for us? Jake asked. It means our normal weapons might not work. Energy weapons would just feed them. Missiles with electronic guidance systems could be drained before they hit their targets. We need more information. The Zenthari sent data files over the next few hours. The images were beautiful and terrible at the same time. The Zenthari worlds looked like fairy tales come to life. Crystal cities floated in the air, held up by beams of pure light. Towers of colored glass stretched into the clouds. The people themselves were living crystals, their bodies catching and reflecting light like precious gems. But the images of the Void Swarm attacks were nightmares. The creatures looked like dark shadows with too many teeth. They moved through solid matter, like it wasn't there, but when they touched anything that used energy, it died. Entire cities went dark in minutes. The crystal people fell to the ground like broken bottles. They're beautiful, Lisa whispered, looking at the images of the Zenthari cities. Like living artwork. And they're dying, Jake said. How do we fight something that eats energy? Lisa studied the data for hours. The Zenthari had tried everything they could think of. Their energy weapons made the creatures stronger. Their shields were drained in seconds. Their fastest ships couldn't outrun the swarm. Captain, I think I understand the problem. The Zenthari are energy-based life forms. Their bodies, their technology, everything runs on different types of power. To the Void Swarm, they're like a walking meal. Jake sent a message to Earth Command. Within 6 hours, he had Admiral Pete Walsh on the screen. Walsh was old and tough, with gray hair and scars from the colony wars. He listened to Jake's report, without interrupting. So we have aliens asking for help against energy-eating monsters, Walsh said when Jake finished. And their own technology makes them bigger targets. Yes, sir. They're asking for our legendary problem-solving abilities. Walsh laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Problem-solving abilities. That's one way to put it. Captain, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. When you were a kid, did you ever have to kill a spider? Jake blinked. Sir? Simple question. Did you ever have to kill a spider? Yes, sir. I used a shoe. Right. You used a shoe. Not a laser, not a computer, not advanced technology. A shoe. Because sometimes the simple solution is the best solution. Walsh leaned forward. The Zenthari are asking for help, but they're thinking like Zenthari. They want advanced technology and clever science, but maybe what they need is a shoe. I don't understand, sir. The politicians want to send diplomats. The scientists want to send a research team, but I've got a different idea. We're going to send the Killworlders. Jake had heard the term before, but only in whispers. Killworlders were humans who lived on the worst planets in known space. Worlds where the air was poison, where the ground was hot enough to melt metal, where the local animals could bite through steel. Most people thought they were crazy, but they were still alive. Sir, are you sure? The Zenthari are asking for help with an impossible problem. They want their best allies. Captain, I've read the reports from Kepler 442b. There's a mining colony. There were 3,000 people. The planet rains acid. The native animals are bigger than tanks and twice as mean. The colonists have been there for 8 years. Not only are they still alive, they're thriving. They've figured out how to turn a hell world into a home. Walsh pulled up a file on his screen. Or take the settlement on Wolf 359b. The average temperature is minus 200 degrees. The local predators hunt in packs and can smell prey from 50 miles away. The colonists there have been living and working for 10 years. They've learned to hunt the hunters. But these are just regular people, Jake said. Miners and farmers and engineers. Regular people who have learned to survive the impossible. Captain, the Zenthari are dealing with creatures that eat energy. They need help from people who know how to live without energy. They need help from people who've learned to make simple tools work when advanced technology fails. Jake began to understand. You want to send people who know how to fight with their hands when their guns don't work. Exactly. The Zenthari are beautiful and peaceful and advanced. But they've never had to sleep in a cave because their houses were destroyed. They've never had to eat whatever they could catch because their food supplies ran out. They've never had to fight for their lives with nothing but their wits and whatever they could find. Walsh stood up. I'm sending you to collect teams from 3 colonies. Kepler 442b, Proxima Centauri C, and Welf 359b. You're going to bring back the people who've learned to live where living should be impossible. Because if anyone can figure out how to deal with creatures that eat energy, it's the people who've learned to live without it. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Sir, what if they can't help? What if even the Killworlders can't solve this problem? Admiral Walsh looked at him with hard eyes. Then the Zenthari die, and the void swarm keeps growing until it reaches human space. And when that happens, I'd rather have our best survivors ready to fight than our best diplomats ready to talk. The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He looked at the images of the beautiful crystal cities one more time. Then he looked at his crew and gave the order that would change everything. Set course for Kepler 442b. We're going to collect some miners. The first drops of acid rain hit the landing pad as the UEC Defiant touched down on Kepler 442b. Jake Morrison watched through the bridge windows as the yellow liquid ate small holes in the concrete. His crew wore full protective suits, but they still moved quickly toward the colony buildings. Amy Chun met them at the airlock. She was a small woman with burns on her hands and a voice that sounded like gravel. When she spoke, Jake could hear the damage the poisonous air had done to her throat over the years. Welcome to paradise, she said, and laughed. The sound was rough but not bitter. I'm guessing you're not here for the scenic tour. Jake explained their mission while Amy led them through the colony. The buildings were carved directly into the mountainside, connected by tunnels that kept the deadly atmosphere outside. Through thick windows, Jake could see the colonists going about their daily work. Children played in the corridors, while their parents operated machinery that turned poison gas into breathable air. "You want fighters?" Amy asked. "We're not soldiers. We're just people who learn to live here." "That's exactly what we need," Jake said. "People who know how to survive when everything goes wrong." Amy stopped walking and pointed through a window. Outside, 3 colonists were working on a broken atmospheric processor. They wore suits that looked like they were made from spare parts, and they moved with careful precision. The acid rain was getting heavier, but they kept working. "You see that processor? It broke down yesterday. If we can't fix it, Sector 7 loses clean air." Those 3 people had been out there for 6 hours. The acid eats through their suits in 8 hours. They know exactly how much time they have left. Jake watched the workers. They moved without panic, even though their lives depended on finishing their job before their protection failed. One of them was a woman who couldn't be more than 25. She was rewiring a control panel with steady hands while acid rain tried to dissolve her helmet. "Her name is Katie Williams," Amy said. "She's our chief medical officer. Last month, she treated 17 different cases of radiation poisoning. The month before that, she performed surgery during an earthquake while toxic gas was leaking into the medical bay. She saved all her patients." Amy led them deeper into the colony. In the main workshop, Jake met Ryan Murphy, the chief engineer. Ryan was a big man with red hair and hands that were permanently stained with machine oil. He was building something that looked like a cross between a generator and a weapon. "Atmospheric converter," Ryan explained. "It takes the poisonous gas outside and turns it into power for our generators. The locals here breathe methane and sulfur compounds. To them, our oxygen is poison. To us, their air is death. But if you know how to work with it, poison becomes power." Ryan showed them around his workshop. The walls were covered with inventions that shouldn't have worked, but did. Machines that turned lightning into electricity. Filters that cleaned. Water so acidic it could dissolve metal. Tools that were built from scrap metal and spare parts, but worked better than anything from Earth. "The trick is understanding the rules," Ryan said. "Every hostile environment has rules. Learn the rules, and you can survive. Master the rules, and you can thrive. The gas that tries to kill you can power your generators. The lightning that tries to fry you can run your computers. The acid that tries to dissolve you can be used to clean your equipment." Jake was beginning to understand what Admiral Walsh had meant. These people hadn't just survived on a world that should have killed them. They had learned to use the hostile environment as a tool. The next stop was Proxima Centauri C, a volcanic world where the ground temperature was hot enough to melt copper. The U's Defiant landed on a platform that was literally carved from the edge of an active volcano. Jake could see lava flowing past the landing pad like a river of fire. Steve Martinez met them at the airlock. He was a lean man with dark skin and eyes that seemed to see everything. His clothes were made from some kind of fabric that could handle extreme heat, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had spent years working next to flowing lava. "You picked an interesting time to visit," Steve said. "We're about to start the morning harvest." Jake didn't understand what he meant until Steve led them to an observation deck. Below them, a team of 20 miners was working on the slopes of the volcano. They were using tools that looked like they belonged in a medieval forge, pulling chunks of rare metal from the lava flows. "The metals we need are only found in active lava," Steve explained. "The heat and pressure create elements that can't be made anywhere else. So we learned to work with the lava instead of against it." Jake watched the miners work. They moved in perfect coordination, like a dance performed next to a lake of fire. One team used long poles to guide floating metal toward collection points. Another team used heat-resistant nets to scoop up valuable materials. A third team watched for the local wildlife. Wildlife? Jake asked. Steve pointed to a shape moving through the lava. At first, Jake thought it was just a rock, but then he saw it change direction. The creature was the size of a small car, with a shell that looked like it was made from volcanic glass. It was swimming through molten rock like a fish through water. Magma. Crawlers, Steve said. They hunt in the lava tubes. Usually, they leave us alone, but sometimes they get curious. Last month, one of them decided to investigate our main drilling platform. We had to convince it to go away. How do you convince a lava monster to leave? Jake asked. Steve smiled. Same way you convince any animal to leave. You make it understand that staying isn't worth the trouble. We've learned to speak their language. The final stop was Wolf 359b, an ice world where the temperature never got above freezing. The U's Defiant landed during what the locals called summer, when the temperature was only 50 degrees below zero. Jake could see his breath inside the ship, even with the heating systems running. Carol Thompson met them at the airlock. She was a tall woman with white hair and blue eyes that seemed to see through solid ice. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived 10 winters in conditions that would kill most people in minutes. "Welcome to the deep freeze," Carol said. "I hope you brought warm clothes." She led them through the settlement, which was built like a fortress against the cold. The buildings were connected by tunnels that were carved through solid ice. The walls were lined with fur from local animals, and the floors were covered with thick rugs that held in every bit of heat. "The trick to surviving here isn't staying warm," Carol explained. "It's learning to work with the cold. Ice is a tool. Snow is insulation. Even the wind can be useful if you know how to use it." She showed them the settlement's main industry, hunting. The colonists had learned to track and hunt the local predators, creatures called frost stalkers that were perfectly adapted to the ice world. The stalkers were the size of bears, with white fur that made them invisible against the snow and teeth that could crack frozen metal. "They hunt in packs," Carol said. "They're smart, fast, and they know this terrain better than we do. But they have weaknesses. They can't see well in bright light, and they always hunt upwind. Learn their patterns, and you can turn the hunters into the hunted." Frank Davis, Carol's deputy, showed Jake a collection of tools and weapons made from frost stalker parts, knives made from their teeth, ropes made from their tendons, clothing made from their fur. Everything the colonists needed to survive, taken from the predators that tried to kill them. "The stalkers taught us everything we know about surviving here," Frank said. "How to move without sound, how to find food under the ice, how to stay warm when the temperature drops below what our equipment can handle. We learned by watching them, hunting them, and becoming better at their own game." As the UE Scifiant prepared to leave Wolf 359b, Jake looked at the teams of colonists he was taking with him. Amy Chun and her people, who had learned to breathe poison and turn acid into power. Steve Martinez and his crew, who danced with lava and spoke the language of fire monsters. Carol Thompson and her hunters, who had learned to survive in a world of ice and predators. They didn't look like heroes. They looked like ordinary people who had gotten very good at doing impossible things. But as Jake watched them work together, preparing for a journey to fight monsters that ate energy itself, he began to understand what Admiral Walsh had seen in them. They weren't just survivors. They were people who had learned that there was no such thing as impossible, only things that required a different approach. And maybe that was exactly what the Xanthari needed. The U's Defiant dropped out of hyperspace near the Xanthari homeworld, and Jake Morrison had to blink twice to make sure he wasn't dreaming. Luminara was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Crystal cities floated in the clouds like jewels. hung in the sky. Towers of pure light reached from the planet's surface to the edge of space. The whole world seemed to glow with soft, peaceful energy. "Well, that's different from home," Amy-chan said, looking out the bridge window. Her voice was still rough from years of breathing poisonous air, but Jake could hear wonder in it. "It's like someone built a world out of fairy tales." Behind her, Ryan Murphy was studying the energy readings from his instruments. "Captain, their power output is incredible. The whole planet is generating more energy than our entire home system. No wonder those void swarm creatures are attracted to this place." The Zenthari sent an escort of their own ships to guide the Defiant to the capital city. Jake had expected military vessels, but the Zenthari ships looked more like works of art than weapons. They were made of the same crystal material as the cities, and they moved through space like dancers. "U.E.'s Defiant, this is Crystal Song, your escort vessel," came a voice over the radio. It sounded like wind chimes mixed with music. "We welcome you to Luminara. Prime Coordinator Valthara is waiting to meet with you." The docking bay was carved from a single piece of crystal the size of a mountain. As the Defiant settled onto the landing platform, Jake could see crowds of Zenthari gathered to watch. They were even more beautiful than their cities. Their bodies were made of living crystal that caught and reflected light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved with grace that made human dancers look clumsy, but Jake could also see the fear in their movements. These beings had never known war or hardship, and now they were facing the end of their civilization. They had gathered to see if the strange humans could somehow save them. Prime Coordinator Valthara met them at the airlock. She was tall and elegant, made of crystal that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When she spoke, her voice was like a symphony played on glass instruments. "Welcome, honored humans. We have heard of your species and your remarkable abilities. We pray that you can help us in our darkest hour." Jake tried to explain what they had brought. Prime Coordinator Weave assembled teams of specialists who have experience dealing with hostile environments and impossible situations. These people have learned to survive where survival should be impossible. Velthara looked at the human teams with confusion. Amy Chun was wearing work clothes that had been patched dozens of times. Steve Martinez carried tools that looked like they belonged in a scrapyard. Carol Thompson had scars on her hands from fighting ice predators. They looked nothing like the advanced scientists or powerful warriors the Zenthari had expected. "These are your greatest experts?" Velthara asked, trying to hide her disappointment. "We were hoping for advanced technology or powerful weapons." "Ma'am," Amy said, stepping forward, "we're not scientists or soldiers. We're just people who've learned to live where living is hard. But sometimes that's exactly what you need." Velthara led them to the Grand Resonance Chamber, a cathedral-like space where sound itself formed visible patterns in the air. The walls were made of crystal that amplified and shaped every noise into beautiful music. It was a place built for harmony and peace, not for planning war. "Please, tell us about your situation," Jake said. Velthara began to explain, but Jake could see the cultural gap immediately. The Zenthari had never faced real hardship. Their technology had always worked perfectly. Their cities had never been damaged by weather or natural disasters. They had never gone hungry or cold or feared for their lives. The void swarm appeared 3 months ago, Velthara said. They consumed our outer colonies completely. Our most powerful energy weapons only made them stronger. Our defensive shields were drained in seconds. We tried to evacuate, but our ships could not outrun them. Amy Chun asked the question that changed everything. "What happens when you can't generate power?" The chamber fell silent. The question was so alien to the Zenthari that they couldn't understand it. They had never been without power. Their bodies were living batteries. Their cities ran on energy that flowed like rivers. The idea of existing without power was like asking them to exist without existing. We do not understand, Velthara said finally. Power is life. Without energy, we cannot survive. Ryan Murphy studied the floating cities through the chamber's crystal windows. How do these cities stay in the air during storms? Storms? Velthara looked confused. We do not have storms. Our weather control systems maintain perfect conditions at all times. What about backup systems? Steve Martinez asked. What happens if your main power fails? Our power does not fail, Velthara said. It has never failed. Why would we need backup systems? Carol Thompson had been quiet, but now she spoke up. What do you do when your food sources run out? Food. Sources do not run out, Velthara said. Our cities produce exactly what we need, when we need it. There is always enough. Jake began to understand the problem. The Zenthari had built a perfect civilization, but perfection had made them fragile. They had never learned to deal with failure, shortage, or disaster. When the Void Swarm appeared, they had no experience with fighting an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with or negotiated with. Dr. Katie Williams, Amy's medical officer, asked to examine a Zenthari volunteer. What she found confirmed their worst fears. The Zenthari bodies were essentially living energy sources. They absorbed power from their environment and used it to think, move, and exist. To the Void Swarm, they were perfect prey. Your entire physiology is based on energy manipulation, Katie explained. Your brains work by processing electrical signals. Your bodies maintain themselves using electromagnetic fields. The Void Swarm can probably sense you from star systems away. But this is how we have always been, Velthara said. We cannot change our nature. Maybe you can't change your nature, Frank Davis said, but you can change how you use it. On Vol 359b, we learned to hunt frost stalkers by hiding our heat signatures. They hunted by detecting body heat, so we learned to mask it. You suggest we hide our energy? Velthara asked. I suggest you learn to control it, Frank said. Right now, you're like a beacon in the darkness. The Void Swarm can see you coming from light years away. But if you could learn to dim that beacon, to hide your energy signature, maybe they would. Lose interest. The Zenthari Council gathered to discuss this idea. Jake could see them struggling with concepts that the human teens took for granted. The idea of limiting their power output was like asking them to stop breathing. The idea of hiding instead of confronting their enemies went against everything they believed. But Amy Chund had a different perspective. You know what your problem is? She said to Velthara, you've never had to make do with less. You've never had to fix something with spare parts. You've never had to go without food or heat or light. These sound like terrible hardships, Velthara said. They are, Amy agreed. But they're also lessons. Every time we've had to do without something, we've learned to do more with less. Every time our equipment has failed, we've learned to fix it or replace it or find another way. Every time we've been hungry or cold or scared, we've learned to be tougher. Steve Martinez joined the conversation. On Proxima Centauri C, we work next to flowing lava every day. The heat tries to kill us, but we've learned to use it as a tool. We don't fight the volcano. We work with it. Maybe you need to stop fighting the Void Swarm and start thinking of them as just another part of the environment. But they destroy everything they touch, Velthara protested. So does lava, Steve said. So does acid rain. So does ice that can freeze your blood in seconds. But we've learned to live with all of these things. We've learned to predict them, avoid them, and sometimes even use them to our advantage. Carol Thompson had been studying the tactical displays that showed the Void Swarm's movements. They're not random, she said. Look at their attack patterns. They follow energy gradients, like predators following scent trails. They're not evil or malicious. They're just hungry. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Ryan Murphy said. This isn't a war. It's a pest control problem. You've got creatures that are attracted to your energy output. The solution isn't to fight them. It's to make your energy output less attractive. Jake watched the Xanthari Council debate. They were beautiful, intelligent, and peaceful. But they were also completely unprepared for the harsh realities of survival. They had built their entire civilization around the idea that problems could be solved with more power, more technology, more energy. The human teams were offering a different approach. Less power, simpler technology, and the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the best solution was the one that required the least resources. Prime Coordinator, Jake said finally, we can't fight the Void Swarm with weapons, but we might be able to solve your problem with something else. What? Velthara asked. Engineering, Jake said. The kind of engineering that builds cities. On worlds where cities shouldn't be possible. The kind of engineering that turns poison into power and ice into tools. The kind of engineering that takes impossible problems and makes them into simple problems. Velthara looked at the human teams. While the Xanthari Council argued about whether the humans could really help them, the Killworlders were already working. Amy Chun sat in her temporary workshop, surrounded by pieces of Xanthari technology that she had taken apart to understand how they worked. This is incredible, she said to Ryan Murphy, who was examining a power crystal the size of his fist. Their entire civilization runs on controlled energy fields. Everything from their lights to their food processors to their transportation uses the same basic principle, which makes them perfect targets, Ryan said. The Void Swarm creatures can sense energy from incredible distances. To them, this whole planet must look like a giant dinner bell. Carol Thompson was studying the attack patterns of the Void Swarm on a holographic display. The creatures had hit 12 colonies in 3 months, always following the same pattern. They appeared at the edge of a solar system, moved toward the strongest energy sources, and consumed everything they found. They're not random, Carol said. Look at this. They always hit the main power stations first, then the population centers, then the defensive installations. They follow energy gradients, like predators following a scent trail. Frank Davis joined her at the display. On Volt 359b, we learned to track frost stalkers the same way. They hunt by following heat signatures and movement patterns. But we also learned how to fool them. What do you mean? Carol asked. We learned to make false trails. We would set up heat sources in areas where we wanted the stalkers to go, and we would mask our heat signatures in areas where we wanted to hide. We turned their hunting instincts against them. Amy looked up from her work. That's it. That's the solution. What's the solution? Ryan asked. We don't fight the Void Swarm, Amy said. We redirect them. We give them what they want, but not where they expect to find it. The idea was simple but radical. Instead of trying to hide from the Void Swarm or fight them directly, the humans would create artificial energy sources that would attract the creatures away from populated areas. The Xanthari cities would go dark, running on minimal power, while automated beacons drew the Void Swarm to empty areas of space. But the Xanthari Council was horrified by the idea. You want us to deliberately attract the destroyers? Prime Coordinator, Velthara asked. You want us to invite them to our system? They're coming anyway, Steve Martinez said. The question is whether you want them to find your cities, or whether you want them to find empty space. But our cities cannot survive without power, Velthara protested. Our people will die. No, they won't, Amy said. They'll just have to live differently for a while, like we do every day. Amy began to explain her plan. The Xanthari cities would switch to emergency power, running on stored energy cells instead of their normal power generators. The beautiful crystal spires would go dark. The floating platforms would descend to the planet's surface. For the first time in their history, the Zentari would have to live with limited resources. This is impossible, Velthara said. Our people do not know how to survive on limited power. We have never faced such hardship. Then you'll learn, Carol said simply. Just like we learned to survive on ice worlds and volcanic planets. You'll adapt or you'll die. Those are your choices. Ryan Murphy was working on the technical details. The energy beacons would be built using modified mining equipment from Steve's volcanic world operations. Each beacon would generate a massive energy signature that would be visible to the Void Swarm from several star systems away. We'll place them throughout the outer system, Ryan explained. As the Void Swarm moves toward one beacon, we'll activate another one further away. We'll lead them on a chase through empty space while your cities stay dark and quiet. But there was a problem. The beacons would only work for a limited time before the Void Swarm drained them completely. And building enough beacons to protect an entire star system would require massive amounts of resources and manpower. Steve Martinez solved the manufacturing problem with typical Killworlder ingenuity. We don't need fancy materials, he said. We just need something that can generate a lot of energy for a short time. On Proxima Centauri C, we use controlled volcanic explosions to power our mining equipment. We can build energy bombs using the same principle. The idea was brilliant and terrifying. Instead of sophisticated beacons, they would create devices that would explode with controlled nuclear fusion, generating enormous energy signatures that would attract the Void Swarm. Each device would burn out quickly, but they could build hundreds of them using materials found in any asteroid field. You want to set off nuclear explosions to attract monsters that eat energy? Velthara asked. Controlled explosions, Steve corrected. And yes, that's exactly what we want to do. The Void Swarm will be drawn to the energy signatures, like moths to a flame. By the time they arrive and drain the energy, we'll have triggered another explosion somewhere else. Katie Williams had been quiet during the planning, but now she spoke, up with a crucial insight. There's something else we need to consider. The Void Swarm doesn't just consume energy randomly. They seem to learn and adapt. If we're going to fool them, we need to make our false energy signatures look like real settlements. What do you mean? Jake asked. I've been studying the medical scans of the Zentari. Their energy signatures have specific patterns, different frequencies for different biological functions. If we want the Void Swarm to chase our beacons instead of looking for the real settlements, our beacons need to mimic those patterns. Amy nodded. She's right. We need to make the Void Swarm think they're chasing actual Zentari populations. We need to create fake energy signatures that look like cities, ships, and people. Frank Davis was already working on the deployment strategy. We'll need to time this perfectly. The Zentari cities go dark just before the Void Swarm arrives in the system. We activate the first beacon on the far side of the system, drawing them away from the planet. As they move toward it, we activate the second beacon even further out. We keep them chasing shadows until they either leave the system or exhaust themselves. What if they don't leave? Velthara asked. What if they realize they're being fooled? Then we try something else, Carol said. That's what survival means. You keep trying different approaches until something works. The most dangerous part of the plan was the timing. The Zentari cities would be vulnerable while running on minimal power. If the Void Swarm ignored the beacons and went straight for the populated areas, there would be no time to bring the defensive systems back online. How long can your people survive on emergency power? Amy asked. Perhaps a few days, Velthara said. Our energy reserves are not designed for extended use. Then we'll make it work in a few days, Ryan said. We've lived our entire lives making. Do with whatever we had available. Now it's your turn to learn that skill." Jake Morrison had been listening to the planning session with growing amazement. 3 weeks ago, he had been a simple patrol captain dealing with pirates and smugglers. Now he was planning the defense of an entire alien civilization, using techniques learned from mining colonies and ice hunters. "There's one more thing," Amy said. "This plan only works if the Zenthari are willing to change how they live. They'll need to learn to ration power, to work with limited resources, and to live without all the comforts they're used to. Are they willing to do that?" All eyes turned to Valthara. The Zenthari leader was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline form reflecting the lights of the chamber in patterns that seemed to show her internal struggle. "For 3 months, we have watched our colonies die," she said finally. "We have seen our people consumed by creatures we cannot fight with our technology or our weapons. You offer us a chance to survive, but the price is that we must become something we have never been." "The price is that you learn to be tougher," Carol said. "Every species in the galaxy has had to learn that lesson except you. Now it's your turn." Valthara stood up, her crystal body catching the light like a prism. "Then we will learn. We will trust in your plan, and we will become what we must become to survive." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. In a few days, they would either save an entire civilization or watch it die. And the only weapons they had were mining equipment, controlled explosions, and the hard-won knowledge of people who had learned to live where life should be impossible. But as he looked at the faces of his team, Amy with her acid-scarred hands, Ryan with his oil-stained tools, Steve with his heat-resistant gear, Carol with her predator-hunting scars, he realized that maybe those were exactly the right weapons for this job. The first thing the Zenthari had to learn was how to live in the dark. Carol Thompson stood in what had once been the Grand Resonance Chamber, now lit only by emergency power cells that cast dim red light on the crystal walls. Prime Coordinator. Valthara sat beside her, her beautiful crystalline body barely glowing. "This is how we lived through the first winter on Wolf 359b, Carol said quietly. 18 hours of darkness every day, huddled around heat sources that we had to ration carefully. We learned that you don't need bright lights to survive. You just need enough light to see what matters." Valthara's voice was weak without the chamber's energy amplifiers. "I feel so diminished, so small." "You're not small," Carol said. "You're learning to be efficient. There's a difference." Throughout the Crystal Cities, the Zenthari were experiencing hardship for the first time in their civilization's history. The floating platforms had descended to the planet's surface with gentle thuds that shook the ground. The beautiful light towers had gone dark. The energy fountains that had danced in the city squares were silent and still. Amy Chun moved through the cities like a teacher, showing the Zenthari how to ration their remaining power. She demonstrated how to operate essential systems on minimal energy, how to prioritize which functions were truly necessary, and how to make difficult choices about what they could live without. "The food processors need the most power," Amy explained, to a group of Zenthari administrators. "But they don't need to run constantly. Process food in batches, store what you can, and eat simple meals that don't require processing." "But we have never eaten unprocessed food," one of the administrators said. "We do not know how." "Then you'll learn," Amy said. "Just like we learned to eat whatever we could find when our food supplies ran out. Raw food won't kill you. Hunger will." Ryan Murphy was working with the Zenthari engineers to modify their power systems. The beautiful crystal technology that had once flowed with endless energy was now carefully controlled and measured. Every watt of power was accounted for and used only when absolutely necessary. "Your systems are incredibly advanced," Ryan told the chief Zenthari engineer, a being called Resonance of Deep Waters. "But they're designed for abundance, not scarcity. We need to teach them to sip power instead of drinking it. Steve Martinez was in the outer system, placing the last of the energy beacons. His volcanic mining equipment had been converted into weapons of misdirection. Each beacon was essentially a controlled nuclear bomb designed to burn bright and fast, creating energy signatures that would attract the Void Swarm away from the populated worlds. Beacon 7 is in position, Steve reported over the radio. All systems show green. We're ready to light up the night. Frank Davis was coordinating the timing from the command center they had set up in the depths of the Zenthari capital. Banks of monitoring equipment showed the approach of the Void Swarm. Still 2 days away, but moving steadily toward the system. They're following the energy trail exactly as predicted, Frank reported. Straight line toward the strongest power source, which used to be the Zenthari homeworld. But now it's just empty space. Jake Morrison watched the countdown timer with growing tension. In 36 hours, the Void Swarm would arrive at the edge of the system. The plan would either work perfectly, or an entire civilization would die. But something unexpected was happening in the darkened cities. The Zenthari, forced to live with limited resources for the first time, were discovering abilities they never knew they had. Without the constant flow of abundant energy, they were learning to work together in ways their individualistic culture had never required. Katie Williams observed the changes during her medical rounds. They're adapting faster than I expected, she told Amy. When they can't rely on technology to solve every problem, they're learning to rely on each other. In the residential sectors, Zenthari families were sharing power cells instead of each maintaining their own energy supply. In the work areas, teams were combining their efforts to operate equipment that had once been run by individuals. The beautiful, isolated crystal beings were becoming a community. This is not entirely unpleasant, Gauthara admitted to Carol as they sat in the dim chamber. There is something satisfying about accomplishing tasks with limited resources. We had forgotten that efficiency could be its own form of beauty. The Void Swarm arrived exactly on schedule. The creatures materialized at the edge of the system like shadows given form, their dark bodies seeming to absorb light itself. Jake watched the long-range sensors as the swarm paused, apparently scanning for energy sources. First beacon activation. In 3.2.1. Mark, Frank announced. 7 billion miles away, Steve's first energy bomb detonated in a burst of controlled fusion. The explosion created an energy signature that blazed like a miniature star, visible across half the system. The effect on the Void Swarm was immediate and dramatic. They're moving, Jake reported, watching the tactical display. All contacts changing course toward Beacon 1, speed increasing. The creatures moved through space faster than any ship, drawn toward the energy source like predators toward prey. But by the time they reached the location of the first beacon, it had burned out completely, leaving only empty space. Beacon 2 activation in 10 seconds, Frank announced. The second explosion lit up a different part of the system, even further from the Zenthari worlds. The Void Swarm immediately changed course, chasing the new energy signature. Steve's plan was working perfectly. They're following the pattern, Carol observed. Just like frost stalkers chasing false heat sources. They can't resist the strongest signal. For 3 days, the deadly game of cat and mouse continued. Each time the Void Swarm reached a beacon location, another explosion would light up somewhere else in the system. The creatures were led on a chase that took them further and further from the populated worlds. But the real victory was happening on the planet's surface. The Zenthari, forced to live like the human colonists, were discovering strength they never knew they possessed. They were learning to fix problems with improvised solutions, to make difficult decisions under pressure, and to work together when individual effort wasn't enough. We have become something new, Velthara told Jake on the fourth day, as the last of the beacons burned out and the Void Swarm finally moved out of the system in search of other energy sources. We are still Xanthari, but we are also survivors. Amy Chun smiled at the crystal being who had become her friend. Welcome to the club. It's a tough membership, but the benefits are worth it. The cities began to return to life slowly and carefully. The power systems came back online in stages, the floating platforms rose back into the sky, and the crystal spires began to glow again. But something fundamental had changed, as Xanthari had learned to live with less. They had discovered that beauty didn't require excess, that strength came from adaptation, and that the most advanced technology in the universe was worthless without the wisdom to use it properly. You have given us more than survival, Velthara said to the assembled human teams in a ceremony held in the restored Grand Resonance Chamber. You have given us the knowledge that we can endure, adapt, and overcome any challenge. You always had that knowledge, Carol replied. You just needed the right circumstances to discover it. As the U's Defiant prepared to leave Luminara, Jake received a message from Admiral Walsh. Other alien species had heard about the Xanthari's successful defense against the Void Swarm. They wanted to know how a peaceful civilization had managed to defeat creatures that consumed entire star systems. Tell them the truth, Walsh said over the communication link. Tell them that sometimes the best weapon against the impossible is a group of people who refuse to believe that anything is truly impossible. The Killworlders returned to their harsh worlds, but they left behind something precious. The knowledge that paradise was not a place, but a state of mind. The Xanthari had learned that their crystal cities were most beautiful, not when they blazed with endless power, but when they glowed with the light of people who had learned to make the most of what they had. And across the galaxy, the word spread that humanity had a special gift. When other species faced impossible problems, they didn't send their best scientists or their most advanced technology. They sent the people who had learned to thrive where thriving should be impossible. They sent the Killworlders. 6 months later, Amy Chun received a message from Velthara. The Xanthari leader had completed her first month living on a human colony world, learning what it meant to face each day with nothing but determination and resourcefulness. The message was brief but meaningful. Thank you for teaching us that paradise is not where you live, but how you choose to live.